Hi, everyone. Again, welcome to the Economic Development Community Board 3 committee meeting of the month of June. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with a roll call vote and approval of the minutes. So I'll start with myself. Andrea Gordillo, present. Megan Joy is absent. I already know she's not here. Alistair Economakis.
Yes.
Herman Hewitt. David Louie. Richard Ropiak.
Present.
Rodney Washington. And Andrew Comey. Okay, thank you all. We're going to go ahead and get started. We just have two informational presentations today. I'm very grateful for you all to be here and present to the committee. I am going to go ahead and hand it to Gaspar Carro, who is going to be talking about the Tech Training Center Workforce Development Fund updates. Gaspar, would you like any screen share abilities, or are you okay?
No, you don't want to see what my screen looks like. I can barely read it myself.
Okay, sounds great. So I'll yield to you.
Great. Yeah, thank you to the Economic Development Committee for receiving me as a representative of the Union Square Tech Training Center's Community Advisory Board. You all, most all of you, I believe, know me. There's only one or two names that I don't recognize. But just to be safe, I'll introduce myself. I'm the Partnership Director for the Lower East Side Employment Network, which Community Board 3 co-founded in the mid-aughts. And we are a group of 9 organizations in the district that provide social services, really all the settlement houses you all know of. And about half of those 9 provide workforce development services. So we're proud to serve as the local hiring vehicle for the board. And I had the honor of being appointed by Economic Development Corporation as a representative to the Community Advisory Board for the Union Square Tech Training Center. So I serve, I believe, a 2-year term, and it's already a couple of years in that was renewed. So tonight, I'm not actually speaking as a representative of Lesson or an employee of Lesson. I'm only speaking as a member of the Community Advisory Board for the Union Square Tech Training Center. So I do not work for RAL. I do not work for Civic Hall or FedCap or any of the entities involved with the project. I know very little about the project other than what the public already knows and what you all know. What I do have access to that you all don't are deliberations and conversations about the project's Workforce Development Fund. So just as a refresher, this is something that was stipulated in the lease by the Economic Development Corporation to the tenant of the property, which is RAL. They are required upon signing and executing the lease to pay $200,000 per year over the course of the 99-year lease that will be donated for the purposes of workforce development training in the tech sector. So, my expertise, coming from a workforce development background, but also having done a good amount of research on the labor market, having a decent grasp of the tech sector as it relates to New York City's labor market. I'm really excited about the opportunity to be able to contribute to the group's efforts to build a framework for this fund. Now, what I'll be providing today, there's no vote, there's really no kind of like agenda to really offer you other than to update the committee on the state of the conversations for this subgroup of what I'll call a CAB, the Community Advisory Board. And it's pretty straightforward. We did not want to outright say how the money should be spent and to whom it should be donated. We really just wanted to come up with a framework and parameters for the fund to be able to kind of guide how EDC would construct perhaps a request for proposals or letters of intent, something along the lines to draw applications for grant money from organizations that operate in the district or in New York City. And the priority from the outset, as Councilmember Rivera had agreed and guided us all on, was to really focus on young people in the district. So that has been a priority for the subgroup of the CAB, is to really think about how this money can be put toward engaging young people from the neighborhoods in the district, so that they can, connect to this tech training center and build their skills and readiness, either for higher education or for careers in tech. So we also, have a really good sense for how the tech sector needs to be finding a wider swath of talent. It's national. It's not just in the city, but it's national need for employees and for talent in tech. And in order to achieve that and to fill that need, businesses in New York City that do provide tech services are going to need to try and find and hire people from wide swaths of the population. That could include people who are unsheltered or unhoused, include people who are older. It could include refugees or immigrants, foreign-born individuals, people whom we call in workforce development as individuals with barriers to employment. They really have to take a more open-minded look at who they're considering for work and for jobs. And obviously, young people who are vulnerable in our district are an important part of that conversation. So those are the populations that we really want to emphasize in the framework of this Workforce Development Fund. There are organizations that in New York City that only work to prepare people for careers in the tech sector. So there's a short list of those. But if you all were to dive into reports and to read more about the economy and the labor market in New York City, there's a need to prepare people for those training programs. There really is not just there isn't even enough of an infrastructure in workforce development to be able to train people from the outset for careers. They need to be trained to be trained. And it is, it speaks volumes about the state of our economy, our education, nationwide. So, the framework that we want to provide for this Workforce Development Fund for the project is really going to, we're hoping, emphasize to prepare people for training. And that's something that in my professional experience, I've witnessed and observed firsthand. That I believe the current mayoral administration is making a priority to build what are called on-ramps to training. So just to maybe give you a little bit more color commentary on the framework, it's very much in process and under development. What we've determined, because RAL's lease is already in effect, I believe, as of today, what we've determined is that we are going to continue to work on this framework and the parameters of what an RFP would look like. And in the meantime, RAL will be depositing the money that they've committed to donate in escrow until we can submit something more formal to the Community Advisory Board and then come back to the Economic Development Committee for additional feedback, and then hopefully have a more finished framework and RFP that we give to EDC. The process and the mechanics of that are still, to be determined, but vaguely that's the process that we're kind of looking at right now. So I've, given you a bit of an introduction and an overview of the fund, the term and the duration of it, the goals and priorities of it, and then the process. So I believe you all had given me 5 minutes to speak tonight. I see that Josh is here tonight, so I welcome him to contribute any comments that he may wish to contribute if I missed anything. But ultimately what we want to be able to do is walk away with any input that you all might want to provide, take down any questions or comments that you might have that will help further and guide the conversations that the CAB and the subgroup that is tackling this Workforce Development Fund framework to continue that conversation.
Thank you,
just to jump in quickly, if you don't mind. So Gasper, thank you. I appreciate everything you said. I just wanted to clarify a couple of points quickly. So our lease with EDC was effective actually right when we started construction, which was about, I want to say 2.5 to 3 years ago at this point. But the initial $200,000, which is an annual commitment, the initial one is actually due upon substantial completion of the building, which we have now reached. So as Gaspar said, we have a commitment both to the city and to the local community, and we want to fulfill that commitment. So we want to put that money into a separate escrow account that is ready to be distributed as soon as we have final guidelines from the CAB that we will present to EDC for final sign off. But listen, we're excited about it. I hope the community is excited about it as well. And I think Civic Hall and FedCap are going to do hopefully some amazing things both for as well as the city as a whole.
Thank you, Josh, for the clarification. Does anyone have any initial questions or comments? Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just give a little background, because I see we have several brand new members here, and Richard and I were, I think, the only ones that remember how it started. So the actual glimmer of an idea for this started with this committee in its district needs statement. And EDC picked up on it, was very responsive, and came to us with this proposal because of our district needs. We worked on it, I don't know, Richard, was it 2 years, a year? Very long time.
Yes.
And then we did a very long resolution that specified most of the criteria in the lease. It then went to city council at that time. By then, Carlina was council member, worked very closely with us and negotiated for as much as in the resolution, which we had been, working with everyone on. So I just wanted to give that background. This is very much a community board 3 project. So, and we're very proud of it.
Richard, please go ahead. Thanks, and thank you, Susan.
Yeah, Gaspar, I may have heard something similar to what you said at some time in the past, but I was hoping that you could flush out the idea that we need to prepare people before they could even go into the training program. Has there been any effort to identify the areas that people need to be prepared?
Yeah, workforce development is very challenging services to provide because we're really faced with many converging structural challenges, socioeconomic, educational, public sector, governmental. It really runs the gamut. So in my experience, both in as a workforce development professional, but also based on what I've read, People who are qualified for a lot of these tech careers have no challenge getting those jobs. However, the companies that are hiring them have way more jobs than there are people to fill them. So they're at a crossroads in how to be able to prepare a workforce that they can hire from. And it takes time, it takes money, and it takes just a lot of effort. So there are about a handful, 5, 7 organizations in New York City that pretty much exclusively focus on tech sector training of workforce. And they either do it for free for people who meet income qualifications, or they do it for very cheap or with subsidies. Now, they are continually recruiting for their programs, but they also have unfilled program seats because they cannot get enough people to participate in the programs, complete them, and then pursue work in tech careers. So what I was describing as an on-ramp are services and training that would really get people into that kind of like sectoral tech-focused training. What do they not really have? They often lack, first of all, just awareness and knowledge that this is even an option in their professional journey, in their career path. You know, there are plenty of people who might have a lot of the kind of like characteristics or qualifications that could get them into that training and to succeed and thrive, but they're not aware of the training programs or even that there are careers to pursue in that field. So partly is just exposure. That's step one. Second, there can actually just be some gaps in literacy, both mathematical and reading. So, you know, literacy or numeracy as well, what's called numeracy for math skills. And then, so that's the second one. That's kind of more base, kind of like skills that we need to be able to prepare people for in order to participate in these trainings. But then there's a lot of other barriers. There's barriers to employment. That means there's barriers to training, lack of childcare, lack of elder care, unstable housing, you know, maybe juggling multiple jobs plus training. So all of these things kind of converge at once and make for a very challenging environment to recruit and prepare people for this line of work. So these on-ramp programs would try and tackle a lot of that, as much of it as possible. In workforce development, the entities that fund it generally want to see what's called rapid attachment to employment upon completion of a program. So what that means is they want to see someone who ends a program and then immediately afterward gets a fulfilling job. But these on-ramps are training for training. So it's an additional step that is very difficult to resource, and you know, that is very important to resource. But it can be difficult to make the business case to philanthropy, to government, to even businesses to invest in that type of work. Did I answer your question, Richard?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Of course.
Thanks again, Gaspar. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments for Gaspar? Anyone? Okay. Anything else you'd like to add, Gaspar, that you might have missed before we move on?
Yeah, I think I just want to encourage the committee to, you know, just remember that this is very much something that we all need to keep backing and keeping an eye on, and to hold all parties accountable. The committee itself, the board, the CAB, the subgroup for the Workforce Development Fund, and also RAL and EDC. Ultimately, delivering and implementing this is going to come down to EDC. So we need to just lay a lot of groundwork and a foundation for what this fund can look like and what it would achieve. And we always welcome and appreciate the committees and the board's input on what it might look like. And, just following up on Josh's comments about Cedric Hall and FedCap, FedCap is one of the most highly reputed and large organizations in New York City, and they do excellent work. Ultimately, in order to connect the vulnerable communities that reside in the district, we will need to open up access to what FedCap does build and provide. So we want to make sure that there's still very much ground and grassroots effort on the part of the board, the community board, but also the many nonprofits and social service organizations in our community, DOE, after schools, et cetera. So this will take a lot of effort and attention, and something that we shouldn't lose sight of long term. So thank you all. I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Richard, do you have a quick question? Sorry, I saw you raise your hand. Sorry, Gaspar.
It was very good to hear from Gaspar and get Lesson's perspective. I think it would be interesting if we could have RAL come by in a couple of months and give us their perspective on how the process is going.
Absolutely. And listen, we said this when we were going through the original ULERP process. We view ourselves as facilitators. We want to work with the community as we go through this process, and we anticipate being involved in this project for a long time. So we want to be involved with the community board meetings. We want to make sure that, the $200,000 that we're going to be contributing annually, we want to make sure it's going to the right places, but also we want to make sure that this building is doing everything we promised you guys that it was going to do when we first, pitched it to you. And I know Susan mentioned, like, the community board is always, the reason this building became what it is or will become what it is. And, we want to be held accountable, and we want to make sure that we're involved in the process along with you guys throughout the duration of our 99-year ground lease here.
All right. Thank you all. I'll move on to our second agenda item. I'll invite, I believe it's Abigail, who's going to be presenting an informational presentation on their East Village Storefront Survey findings. Is it going to be you, Susan, or I'm sorry, Abigail?
It's actually going to be I think this was slightly misadvertised. It's a collaborative research team with EVCC and Village Preservation. And we have some slides that Lily, who is a Cooper Square relevant fellow, will be able to share if we can give her permission to share her screen.
Yeah, I'm going to make you a co-host, Lily. Okay, you can take it away.
In the meantime, I'll just really appreciate the opportunity to share with this committee, and good to see so many of you in Zoom. I'm coming at you live from East 4th Street. I don't think, Susan, you're in the community board office, but if I just knock on the door, maybe you will come out and say hello.
No,
so you're at home. It's good to be at home. So this, we can go on to the next slide. I just want to first introduce the 3 organizations that contributed to this research. So we really are a research team, and I want to kind of spend a moment to talk about how kind of special the approach to commercial district data collection and management is. It's somewhat unique within the context of how commercial data is gathered and stewarded in New York City. And so even though we're going to be showing you some bird's eye view maps and numbers, our approach here has really been deeply based in the shoe leather work and nuanced awareness of not only our neighborhoods storefronts, but also the people and the stories that enliven them. So I hope you can sort of feel that. And it's been a labor to collect all of this storefront data and clean it and analyze it. But I think I can speak for myself at Cooper and in our partners that it's already been really essential to we've been applying it even before we presented it to the community board and released some sort of formal report. We've been using this data in our work to support small businesses every day. And we hope that it lays the groundwork for ongoing commercial district data collection and analysis, and really look forward to working with this committee and CB3 in general, continuing to be partners together, engaging with this work in progress tonight, and then also in an ongoing way. So I'm Abigail Ellman. I'm the Director of Planning at the Cooper Square Committee. I'm joined tonight by Laura Sewell, who's the Executive Director at the East Village Community Coalition, and Juan Rivero, who is the East Village and Special Projects Director at Village Preservation. And we are 3 community organizations that are committed to storefront vitality and the culture that they represent. And we approach small business support from different angles and through different programs: district marketing, public space activation, merchant organizing, and small business services. So if you go on to the next slide, I'll just share a general roadmap of what we're going to look at tonight. So start with some introduction and look at some of our data sources and methodology. Next, I will share trends with respect to storefront vacancies, which unsurprisingly increased over the period we looked at from 2019 to 2021, but we'll get into the details in a minute. Then Laura from EVCC will share changes in storefront business composition, things like retail mix, businesses that closed or opened, relocated, and expanded. And it's there that we get into some of the more surprising findings about which categories of businesses decreased, remained stable, or even grew, as well as some positive stories from local businesses about expansions and relocations within the neighborhood. And then finally, Juan from Village Preservation will describe some of the changes in formula retail location and prevalence, which overall decreased, but there's also some details that he will get into in a little bit. And then most importantly, we're very interested to take your comments and questions and get into a discussion about how we can best apply these findings. So now I will turn it over to Laura to begin to describe some of our data sources and methodology.
Thanks, Abigail. So the overarching goal of this survey was to update a fall 2019 storefront survey conducted by the Lower East Side Partnership as part of a commercial district needs assessment of the East Village. Within the blocks bounded by East 14th Street to the north, Houston Street to the south, Avenue D to the east, and 3rd Avenue and Bowery to the west. Having this pre-pandemic snapshot of the district inspired us to resurvey the area in October 2021 to reflect updated storefront locations, occupancies, and vacancies in the East Village. The civic tech group Beta NYC, which had been working with EVCC on the What's Open East Village map, provided our team with free technical support to facilitate the survey and use of the ArcGIS Collector app. With their help, we were able to create an accurate map of all known storefronts or ground floor non-residential spaces accessible to the public in the district. This groundwork will make ongoing commercial district data collection and analysis far less labor intensive than this endeavor. I just want to take a moment to thank Cooper Square's intern Lily Zabalos for her remarkable commitment to this project. We literally could not have done this without her. And then I'll hand it over to Juan to take you through our methodology.
Thank you. So using the ArcGIS collector tool that Laura was just describing, we conducted the storefront survey in October, and we noted all changes in occupancy. So if there was a new business in place, we indicated the new name and the type of business. If it was vacant, we noted whether it was empty, under construction, or explicitly available for rent. And if it was not clear, we set it aside. We then did a manual review of every single last entry to ensure consistency among the business categories for which we relied on the North American Industry Classification System. Second, to correct discrepancies. And third, to confirm vacancies that were unclear during the physical survey. During this review, we also flagged all formula retail establishments among the survey storefronts by using online resources. And finally, to analyze the relationship between the storefront data and landlord size, we used the Who Owns What tool, which relies on HBD registration data to link together properties through common ownership. So that was basically our approach. Now we're going to go over some of our descriptive findings, meaning that today we'll be focusing more on what the data show than on what the findings mean. That part of the analysis is still underway. As Abigail mentioned, she's going to be covering vacancies. Laura will be looking at business composition, and then we'll go back to me to look at formula retail. So Abigail, I'll leave it to you.
Great. So first of all, I'll just quickly define what we're talking about when we are even talking about storefronts in general. This is an East Village storefront report. We're talking about ground floor, non-residential spaces that are accessible to the public. We counted 1,776 such spaces within our study area. And again, huge props to Lily for so much work collecting and analyzing this, this information. And a vacant storefront, we said a storefront was vacant anytime any of the following conditions are true. So the storefront space, in this case, has an available or for lease sign displayed, or if it's empty with no activity inside, or the storefront is under construction, or the entire building is under construction. And we chose this definition of both storefront and vacant to standardize with small business services definition that they use in their commercial district needs assessments citywide. So in the next slide, you'll see that over the study period from October 2019 to October 2021, the percentage of vacant storefronts increased from 14% or 246 storefronts, which were broadly scattered, though concentrated on certain corridors, to 19% overall, or 331 vacant storefronts over the 1,776 spaces total. And this vacancy rate increased on each of the north-south corridors, meaning First Avenue, Second Avenue, Avenues A, B, and C. It did not increase on Bowery, Third Avenue, or Avenue D. It stayed the same on 14th Street, and there was sort of a large increase on Houston Street, but we can mostly attribute that to a special condition that happened there at 250 East Houston, where 3 new vacancies were created through a development site in that parcel. Otherwise, the geography is fairly scattered. We continue to do geospatial analysis on the locations of the storefront vacancies, but they are pretty scattered about the neighborhood. In the next slide, we'll see that of the 333 vacant storefronts we observed in 2021, 171 of them are new vacancies. And we did some additional analysis on these new vacancies by property owner. Ownership of property in the East Village, in the study area is, like New York City in general, skews towards larger landlords with large portfolios of properties. So if you look at the next slide, this has the breakdown of storefronts by landlord size overall, and then where the new vacancies are located. And there is a slightly disproportionate amount of new vacancies located in buildings owned by medium or large landlords, those who own between 6 and 60 buildings. In the next slide, we also looked at the vacancies that were also vacant in 2019. So there's 149 of those. These are their locations, pretty scattered, but where we looked at landlord data, we found a similar finding. In the next slide, you can see that, again, there's a slight disproportionate location of the persistent vacancies in buildings owned by large and medium landlords, and also those in very tiny landlords who only own one building. So that is all for vacancies for now, and I will pass it over to Laura to talk about business composition, closures, openings, expansions, and relocations.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. So we are experiencing an ongoing churn with many closings, openings, expansions, and relocations. 336 businesses total closed since 2019, and 261 new businesses opened, and they're still at it in both directions. Next slide. The mix of business types changed. The number of retail trade establishments were relatively stable in comparison to accommodation and food services and all other services during the pandemic. And next slide. Certain business categories showed an overall net decrease, and you will find this is a pandemic story. We lost laundromats, dry cleaners and tailors, tattoo shops, professional services such as lawyers and architects, banks and credit unions, snack and ice cream shops, full-service restaurants, bars, and clubs. Limited service restaurants showed only a slight decrease. And next slide. And other business categories remain stable. Medical and dental offices, pharmacies and health stores, supermarkets and specialty food stores, smoke shops, and theaters. And next slide. And other business categories grew. Bookstores, bike stores, record shops, art galleries, wine and liquor stores, pet-related businesses, and bodegas and delis. Next. So, of 13 establishments expanded into neighboring storefronts between October 2019 and October 2021. 3 were full service restaurants, 3 were bars or clubs, 2 were wine or liquor stores, 2 were supermarkets or specialty food, and the remaining 3 were a cafe bakery, an architecture firm, and an art gallery. It should be noted that 3 of these expansions are possibly temporary rebrands of overthrow hospitality locations, and that only one of these establishments, the H Mart on 3rd Avenue, is a chain. None of these businesses expanded across the tax lot. All expanded into adjacent storefronts at the same address or AKA address within one lot. Although admittedly Kindred, Veselka, and the H Mart are very large lots, very large buildings. So we'll just highlight one example. We'll have more profiles in the full report, but C&B Cafe's narrow frontage did not afford much room for outdoor dining. They're the one on the upper right with the laundromat next to them. The cafe pivoted operations during the pandemic to offer fresh baked bread to a neighborhood eager for it. When the pandemic took its toll on the dry cleaners next door, C&B took the opportunity to gain more room for the bakery, cafe, and outdoor dining setup. They still haven't removed the dry cleaner sign. I don't know if that's sentimental or what. Next slide. 17 East Village businesses found opportunities to relocate, with 3 more relocations underway at the time of the survey. So that's 20 total move, but they stayed within the East Village. The vast majority of these businesses relocated into slightly larger and or more prominent locations when other businesses were forced to close. The example here is Superiority Burger, which had long outgrown their popular hole-in-the-wall location on East 9th Street. They were temporarily leasing nearby storefronts for storage and operations. When neighborhood staple Odessa was unable to make a comeback after the pandemic, Superiority jumped at the chance to run a full-service restaurant on Avenue A. And that is yet to open, but is expected to open soon. And we've been watching their progress on EV Grieve. And I'll hand it back to Juan to tell you more about the chains.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, so let's look at formula retail. First of all, what do we mean by that? We use the same definition for this category as the New York State Senate, and the same definition as was used in the CB3 Special District proposal. So we're talking about establishments that have 10 or more branches in the US, plus 2 or more of listed standardized aspects in their business operation. Next slide. So these are the locations. The first thing to note is that the total number of retail establishments decreased slightly from 103 or 6% overall to 96 or 5% overall. That's a decline of almost 7%. To give you a benchmark, the decline in Manhattan during roughly the same period was 13%, almost double. And I say roughly because I'm basing that number on the Center for an Urban Future report, and Center for Urban Future uses a slightly more restricted definition for formula retail. So it's not quite oranges to oranges. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So this is a location of the closures. There were 21 of them. They're mostly scattered, if a bit weighted towards the western half of the study area, with a cluster of 5 around 250 East Houston, which Abigail mentioned earlier. Okay, so these charts tell us what replace businesses when they close. The pie chart on the left shows the result when a chain closes. The one on the right shows the results when any business closes. Okay, so this illustrates that chains that close tend to be replaced by vacancies or other chains more often than businesses as a whole. These are the openings of chains. There were 14 of them with a cluster along St. Mark's Place between 3rd and 2nd Avenue. These are mostly Asian American specialty stores and bubble tea shops. And so these charts now tell you what new businesses replaced. The one on the left shows what new chains replaced, and the one on the right shows what new businesses in general replaced. And this comparison illustrates that new chains tend to replace chains and vacancies far more often than businesses as a whole. Finally, this table breaks down ownership of sites with chains by landlord size. The first bar gives you all storefronts. The second bar gives you sites with chains on them. And the third bar gives you sites where the tenant changed from non-chain in 2019 to chains. So I will call your attention first to the second bar that shows that tiny and small landlords own proportionally fewer sites with chains than larger ones. And I would call your attention to the third one that shows that no tiny or small landlord at all has since 2019 changed a tenant from non-chain to chain. Large and medium-sized landlords were disproportionately the ones who did. Okay, so that concludes the presentation of our data for tonight. So as we indicated at the beginning, this analysis is very much a work in progress. So we would love to hear your feedback and any questions on what we presented, but especially any questions that we might tackle as we proceed with our analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Richard, please go ahead.
You're not going to like this. You're not going to like this, folks. The community board has undertaken 2, maybe 3 surveys in the last 20 years. You folks are the latest iteration. Laura is familiar with some of this. The community board undertook it and used manpower to do it. The resources that you have available to you now weren't available years ago to the community board. So congratulations on catching up to that. Problem is, from what I'm listening now, you hear it in regard to sports, in regard to baseball particularly. They talk about paralysis by analysis. You're coming perilously close to that because the discussion about formula retail establishments doesn't help the people who are living here. It helps the people who are doing a survey because you're doing a wonderful job coming up with all of the numbers and whatever. Trouble is, I look at the map and I look at the discussion and I look at the examples you give, and everything is from Avenue Way west. I don't recall hearing anything by any establishments from Avenue Way east, which is half of your study area. What are you telling us then? You're only giving us half the picture as far as I could see. Secondly, with the listing of establishments that closed as opposed to opened, maybe it's buried in there somewhere, but I didn't see anything about liquor license establishments. And that's been an ongoing concern about Community Board 3 since forever. Another part was, I gather, and I know it's difficult to do, and I cannot fault you for that. But there are a fairly substantial number of commercial establishments, retail establishments that are on the side streets. By doing the avenues, you're doing a wonderful thing. I don't know what percentage of retail establishments within Community Board 3 are on the side streets. And lastly, did you do 14th Street, 8th Street, and Houston Streets in your survey? If you did, that's good. Because if you left that out, That's not.
Can I
true,
address
because
your
we are major
questions?
thoroughfares.
May
Yeah,
I
I just,
address your questions?
there's
I-
3 there. I wanted to make sure that the presenters got your
I-
questions
I
down.
did get the questions, and
Okay.
I'd like to respond because I think there may be some misunderstandings.
Go
The
ahead.
one chart we showed of the app, we surveyed the entire district from Avenue D to Third Avenue. We even surveyed beyond CB3 because that's what had been done to the west side of Third Avenue because that's what had been done in 2019. So side streets, we got it. 14th Street, we got it. Houston Street, we got it. We surveyed every storefront or place where the public could enter in the entire district. So that is all included in our raw data. So when Abigail was showing a slide that showed the corridors, we were looking to compare 1009 with 1003 and see if we could see a distinction in what had happened there. It's just the vacancy rates on the corridors. So the raw data is all there. And the raw data is every single storefront. C and B is actually between A and B. And it's just one profile of a business that expanded. We're going to do profiles of many of them and show examples of why they expanded or relocated. We just only had time this evening for one.
Okay.
Your SLA question, last but not least, is something that very much is of interest to me. We don't have historical data on that. That is not part of what SPS and other bids count. So it is entirely possible for me to add a column to the Airtable to put beer and wine, full liquor, columns in there and add that information as time goes on. But we don't have historical data on it other than what we have kept ourselves, for example, in the North Avenue A group. Okay, so that's the problem. We were looking for a straight comparison with what was done in 2019 up to SBS standards. So
Okay,
I hope that helps.
Yep.
Does anyone else want to respond to Richard's questions, or otherwise I'll just move on to Alistair. Okay, Alistair, go ahead.
Hi guys, thanks for the data and the presentation. I'm sure it's a lot of work going around and gathering all the data, no doubt. I guess one comment and one question. One comment is, I see a city as kind of an evolving organism. You're always going to have change, right? So if you do the survey in next year, the year after, I'm sure you're going to see a bunch of weed shops pop up, a bunch of other shops close. Things are just constantly going to change one way or the other. You're never going to find I think, a strict pattern in any way, because it's an evolving city. With your data, and I think it's important when you present data and you try to draw any type of kind of reasoning or pattern in your data, is you need to look at statistics. You should, and I don't know how easy it is for you to have someone, a statistician in your team, say, is this really statistically significant? Because when you're talking about, small landlords versus big landlords, I don't know if your data had 3 small landlords and 100 big landlords, in which case your data wouldn't really be statistically significant. It shows what it shows, but it's meaningless. If your data had a lot of points and it went through a statistical model, and there's a way to analyze that and say, hey, this really is a pattern. But without statistics, you can't really say there's a pattern there, because you don't know what the data really shows. So again, I'm not sure what the purpose of this is. I mean, it's good information and it's good to see. It's constantly going to be changing. But if you're trying to draw any type of kind of conclusions or patterns, I think if you got into statistics or spoke to a statistician, they could help you to say, yeah, this is really something that's shown or not shown. That's what I want to say. But thank you so much for it.
So thank you very much for your comment. Just respond to both parts. Certainly, the city's always changing, and certainly the outcome of our street survey was in some ways obsolete the moment we concluded it. But there's really no alternative, right? Either you base your recommendations and your analysis on what is there at your snapshot in time, or you make it up. So while there is evolution, the evolution falls into a pattern and you try to approximate it. And we thought that it was especially important to approximate it now, given that the pandemic reflects a critical juncture in the commercial evolution and change in the neighborhood. So there are all these stories about what impact this crisis had. And so there had to be a way of quantifying it rather than just going off hearsay or whatnot. As to your second point, that's absolutely well taken. That's why I made the distinction that what we're presenting were the descriptive findings. So we're presenting the data without making any claims about what the data actually means. And you're absolutely right. It may be that this pattern that appears to be a pattern between size of landlord and chains or whatever doesn't really mean anything because it's not statistically significant. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, but that's certainly something that we are going to be being careful about as we conduct the analysis.
Thank you.
Susan, go ahead.
Can I just add one more thing on kind of the usefulness, bringing back to the fact that there's sort of a report and a snapshot and all of these questions about statistical significance, and then there's just like the work of trying to support small businesses, which is personally what I do and what I think the rest of the team does. And we've already been able to use the fact that there are these available storefront spaces in buildings that are owned by very tiny landlords who may be very old or may not be like this space may be vacant persistently, not because of any sort of like warehousing behavior, but just neglect or difficulty finding a tenant. And we've been able to kind of match small entrepreneurs who are working in these same, again, maybe not statistically significant, but still apparent business categories of sort of dry retail or art galleries or office that can easily move into an available space. So I think there is a value just to knowing where the locations of the vacancies are, knowing the types of businesses that seem to be performing well in this environment and doing the work of making those matches happen. And that's something that we've been able to do with some success in a small scale.
Thank you. All right, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I want to say thank you. This is fascinating and great work. And as Richard mentioned, Community Board, along with EVCC and Cooper Square, have looked at some of this before. You're doing it much more efficiently now. One thing is, I've been very curious about the recovery here as opposed to recovery in other parts of particularly Manhattan. I don't know if that's something you have any information yet, but also, we've taken snapshots in time and compared them, but I think right now it's a little bit different. I think what we're looking at now is kind of the pathway of the recovery. So it's even a different look. I assume you're going to do it again next October. Is that true?
Yes, if I can drag these fine people into the weeds with me again, we will do it again.
Well, you can spread the word. Spread the word. But yeah, there's, and I certainly do see with the small landlord, just from, we live here and we talk to people, the small landlords have relationships and, they keep their tenants because they care about the tenants and they care about the community. So, that is a very different thing we see. It's not just all, it is statistics, but it's also, understanding our neighborhood. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to seeing more.
Gaspar, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I'm glad I stuck around because this is relevant and really interesting. I really appreciate this presentation from the team. I'm I'm fascinated by the landlord size data, but I'm also curious if you all looked at formula retail by storefront width. And maybe another criteria would be, the unit's square footage. Is it more likely to be formula retail if the unit is more than 600 square feet, or if it's between a specific square footage range? And then also what the price per square foot is, the rental price per square foot. And there's probably a few other criteria to analyze the information by. But those three are ones that I'm particularly curious about, because storefront width is probably something that the board could take a look at as something to tackle. Are narrower storefronts less likely to be chains? Well, in that case, maybe the board wants to consider putting forward recommendations on storefront width regulations. Points like that are some of the things that seemed interesting to me.
Sorry, Gaspar, what was the third one? So you mentioned storefront width, you mentioned rent by square foot, and what was the other one?
The overall square footage of the unit.
Overall square foot.
So
Yeah.
width, square footage, and price. So one
Yeah.
thing I will just say is price data is
Yeah.
the hardest
Yeah.
thing. Even on our merchant association meetings, where they'll tell you their sales, they'll tell you what happened in their apartment, they'll tell you anything but what they're paying rent. It's very, very hard for us to get that. But the community board and this committee has looked at storefront width and regulating storefront width. So it is something that we will break down what happened with our chains. That's a good thing for us to just collect. So we absolutely can do that. We can do that from maps, so it's fine. So thank you for the comments.
We have Katie Loeb next, and then Richard.
Hi, everyone. Katie Loeb from Councilmember Rivera's office. I'm so sorry to, nobody likes when the elected office shows up, but I do want to thank you all for this report. I think the data that gets collected through reports like this is really, really important in understanding what the storefront and small business sort of landscape is. In fact, Councilmember Rivera passed a bill in her first term to mandate SBS to do this across the city. And I think what you would find, I heard a lot of, early questions about statistical significance. And I think what we're hoping to find is seeing more of this type of research, gathering that statistical significance. And how can we look at how is the East Village or, Alphabet City, Lower East Side, CB3 doing in comparison to the rest of the city? And then we can get really good policy recommendations from that. So I want to thank you all for this report. It was really, really fascinating to see, and sorry to intrude on your meeting.
Not at all, Katie.
Thank you very much
for being here.
Always welcome to not intrude.
Yeah, not an intrusion. Thank you for coming. And thanks to the council member for all her support of our work.
Richard, go ahead.
In response to Laura, you may want to add it up to your numbers, but on 4th Street and First Avenue, the deli just turned over. And I happened to find out that the rent increased in that particular deli on the southeast corner from $17,000 a month to $20,000 a month. So for your square footage and location, you might want to just stick that in your numbers.
Yeah,
But
thank you.
Yeah.
Were you able to provide us data on the other 1,000?
but more as I step back after listening to the extended discussion, I realized that however it got established, the formula retail establishment definition always struck me as being out of whack in some ways. If you're talking about a definition that defines you as being in the formula retail category, if you have 10 or more branches in the United States, you could have 10 branches in New York and none in the other 49 states.
Right.
I'd
So
like
Richard,
to suggest that somebody take another look at that to see
okay, so
if
I
it
just
can be
want to
fine-tuned for New York City.
got it. I'm happy to remind you where that came from and why we're using it. That's actually was CB3's consultant, George Jane's recommendation when he looked at several definitions of retail, so there was, I believe, just off the top of my head, there was like a Cold Spring definition that was much tighter. There was the New York State definition, which is the one that we're using. And I think that that was also confirmed by Senator Hoylman's office that that's what they're using. So it's established. So it's a kind of has a legal established basis. For us, it's really curious that it excludes, like there are a lot of massive Asian chains that only have one branch here. And it happens to be in New York serving NYU, right, in the East Village. So that seemed odd to us that they don't count, but there are a lot of local places like the latest ice cream shop on 9th Street and Avenue A is a chain. It's a local chain, but it's massive. So that we had to pick something. So we picked the definition that I believe is in the CB3 resolution about the special district and has generally within CB3's work on the Economic Development Committee been the definition that's in use. That's why we used it. We didn't just pick it out of the blue. I've been grilled by my collaborators on this subject several times. So,
and I would share actually your uneasiness with the definition, because there are ways in which establishments have the color of an independent business, even though they're not, like the examples that Laura gave. Whereas conversely, so in terms of the uniqueness to the neighborhood, of the offerings, of distinctiveness, they might not seem like chains. In terms of their economic impact, they very much operate like chains. So it's a difficult line to draw. It has to be drawn somewhere. So Laura gave you the story of where it was drawn, and it's the one that has been adopted by other folks. So for the sake of being able to communicate with those folks, it made sense to stick to it.
But we are open to, shifting. Should the committee and CB3 decide to do that?
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from July. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I'm a new board member to CB3. First of all, I just wanted to come here, the Economic Development Committee meeting. I'm very glad I'm here. Thank you very much for the research and presentation. I would like to make 2 points. One is, this is great information. The groups have collectively collected, and I'm just thinking, how can we put into better use? I wonder if anybody has thought of, starting a, website listing the available, vacant storefronts, and if the landlord consider providing their asking rent for the vacancies, because that, especially the smaller, medium-sized landlords, and especially if the vacant units have been vacant for more than 6 months, I think that would be really useful for the young entrepreneurs in the city, in the district, to have access to that. I'm not sure if that's even possible, given that they may already have real estate reputation. But if there is a way for us to think of better use of the data, that would be wonderful. The second point is in line with what I think another attendee suggested to expand the data collected. Could we possibly ask the landlord what is their asking rent for the vacancies? Because some landlords, they're willing to wait a long time to get a high rent per square footage, and they consider that waiting period to be a cost of business. But that's not necessarily a benefit to the public. So that would be useful information. Thank you very much.
Thanks, July, and welcome to the committee. Those are great questions.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to answer them or
Sure.
respond?
I mean, I'll take it if unless one of you guys want. I absolutely agree that that would be very useful information. It's the collection of the information that is the rub here. Asking landlords to give you what their asking price is I mean, getting them to talk to you is the first challenge. Taking the information from the horse's mouth is the other challenge. How much stock to put on that information? I mean, if there were an easy way of collecting that, but there were open suggestions, because I agree it would be a very useful data set to have.
I would just add to that, I think there's maybe a subset of it that's more useful than others, which is, again, these sort of smaller landlords. Where there's more of like it's more possible to engage them and more possible, maybe they even need the service of having their space advertised.
Sure.
And I would also just say that I think that this is something that is, requires support for if we're going to be sort of using this community-based model moving forward for stewarding this data. As a community board, you can advocate for us as community-based organizations to have sort of the support and resources to come up with neat tools like that. I mean, I think, yeah, there's many applications that would be useful, but it does require sort of like the support to work on those things.
Thanks. Okay, Alistair?
Sure, thanks. Just some comments. If you want to get the rent data, just call the broker number. You can bypass the landlord altogether. If the store's for rent, there's usually a sign in the window with a number for the broker. Call the broker and ask them what the asking rent is. Simple as that. You don't have to go to the landlord. If there's no sign in the window, I'm going to assume there's a very likely scenario that the space is rented. The rental, if you have a vacant store, vacant for a long time, it doesn't mean that the landlord is necessarily waiting for a higher rent. There are many occasions where we've had stores vacant for over a year because we simply had no interest in those stores. I'm not talking about the East Village so much as more uptown. So there could simply be a demand issue, which during COVID there was. I mean, I rented a store. It was a tattoo place on 21 First Avenue. It was a long-term tenant of ours. He's been there. We've helped him out for a long time. Eventually, he packed it in. It wasn't a matter of rent. It wasn't anything else. It's like, Alistair, I'm done. I'm a certain age now, and I'm going to close. And he closed. I rented it out to Little Frankie's, who's next door, and I gave him 1 year free rent. What happens, and it's complicated, is once you have an agreement with a potential tenant to sign a lease, that negotiation can take several months because you have lawyers involved, you're going back and forth on terms, they've got to do their due diligence. So you can have several months of negotiation just on the lease. And then once the tenant has the lease, then they've got to go and apply for permits in order to do the construction. So if there's no sign in the window that the space is for rent, the spaces might be rented and the tenant's waiting for DOB to issue them the renovation permits. And that can take a very long time, specifically if there's violations on the building, preventing the permit to be pulled, back and forth, plumbing permits, electrical permits, etc. I've had tenants waiting for 4 or 5 months to pull permits in some situations because of technicality. So I just want to clarify that things are not so simple in that stores are vacant and people are just waiting for high rent. If you want to get the rent, call the broker. I'm sure they'll give you the rent on the unit. Okay?
So yeah, thank you, Alistair. I would like to say I completely agree with you, and for this point of this survey, we use the definition SBS uses because that's what everybody else is doing citywide, and we tried to standardize our what we're doing here. I do keep track of who went to SLA committee for, a liquor license, and I know that they're not going to be there. It's going to be 6 months before we see, maybe you're going to see them renovating, but that's not going to be open for a while. And just, there are other, there are permits, sometimes there's construction permits in the windows, and I do keep track of all that in real time as well. So you're right, the vacancy rate is probably less than it sounds as being described by the survey technique, but that is what SBS does. And then, I find brokers may not, you're a businessman, you might be able to call a broker and get a price pretty easily, but I've tried, and it's immediately questions about, what do you want to do? And they don't come right out with the price right away. So it's not as simple as it sounds.
Thank you.
Interesting. I would think they would provide kind of a range, that's their job.
And some of
maybe
them do. Some of them advertise even with a range, but others are, boy, it's just inquiry. That's it. So
say, hey, I have a, I'm thinking of opening up a restaurant. I'm interested in kind of what rental range you're looking for here. There's got to be, I mean, broker's got to give you the numbers.
Yeah. It's just, it's if there were 3 of me, I'd be all over it.
I do think it's a different matter to publish what we have already collected and cleaned than it is to constantly update. I mean, that's what CoStar is. It's a proprietary data set, and it has all of the available spaces in the and their asking rents and all the specs. So I don't know if we want to necessarily reproduce that, but maybe there's some middle ground that would be useful. Particularly for small business, really micro businesses that are having trouble accessing space.
Katie?
Yeah, so when you mentioned like demand problems, especially more uptown, I feel like that's very interesting because that's also where we can kind of think about policies that would help increase that demand for the storefront retail. So I was wondering if there is a section in like the survey or anything about demand, or how we can capture like why, if there's a lack of demand for that space, why that is.
Yeah, I think that connects a little bit with the point that Alistair was making. It's hard to know. We call the sites that have been vacant since 2019 persistently vacant, but 2 years is a pretty small time window. I think that what's persistently vacant and what isn't is going to become clear as this survey is replicated. Beyond that, I think that you're relying on sort of case-by-case analysis. You tell stories and you might be able to tell enough of them that bring into relief what's happening in some of them, but doing that neighborhood-wide is a bit of a methodological challenge. Because it's so various, right? I mean, we may be able to see patterns. We may be able to see patterns between vacancies at landlords. Maybe they will be very efficient to, try to disentangle what's going on with some particular landlord that owns a whole slew of properties. But we're not really there at that moment, at that point in the analysis. So we'll see where we are, I guess, in a month or so.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I mean, I think of it as a business. I always think of business attraction. I've always thought about business attraction. I think about blocks like 9th Street that, have all the boutiques and are a destination and support each other and work together. We have a lot of art galleries that are coming in, and they're coming into places that were maybe a drugstore or, I know art galleries in certain areas in the district are a gentrification issue, but I think in the areas where they're coming into the East Village, it's, they're replacing a tattoo shop that left or a drugstore or whatever. So that, it'd be interesting to look at that too, but it would be nice to say, hey, we're happening again for this particular type of business. And maybe you want to be here. If Chelsea is now beyond your means, it's, you know, a good place to move back. So we want to look at and think about that sort of thing too.
Thanks. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing I just thought of, you know, the Miracle Grill on First Avenue closed because they were able to move to the West Village and get a cheaper, better spot. And it's a more upscale neighborhood where they, you know, people are richer, everyone can afford more. And, you know, I wonder, from what I understand, you know, that that is true, that we're more expensive than the West Village now, and other areas that you might think would be more expensive. Do you have any information on that at all?
Well, I'll just say, you mean Organic Grill, right? I mean, my understanding from, no, it's fine. My understanding from, I remember Miracle Grill fondly too. My understanding is that his landlord was just not interested in renewing his lease. That was, so yes, they did try to get another location within the East Village, and they couldn't find anything they could afford.
Right, it was cheaper.
They found a better deal and we lost him. On the other hand, for 20 businesses relocated within the East Village, and I think that's really encouraging. So they somehow found a bigger space, or you know, a more manageable rent than their rent was going to be. You know, I do think that that's encouraging. So that was definitely one we lost that makes me sad, but I feel like there are anecdotally a good number of stories.
Yeah, I'm glad it's not a trend. My information came from the SLA lawyer because they, you know, they were handling the removal of the license.
Right.
And they got a better space cheaper in the West Village.
Well, yeah, but he was going to have to move anyway, and it's a very competitive market here for, you know, for the nightlife, as you know.
Really?
Yeah. There's so many, really every single one of these businesses carries this, like a really special story, and we are trying to draw out bigger trends, which is why we showed the expansions and relocations as part of the openings and closures, because like a single storefront space, maybe a business closed, another one open, but it's in fact that a business relocated within the neighborhood. And we did count the number of businesses that relocated outside of the neighborhood. We just didn't present those findings. If you think that would be at all interesting to look at another time. But I do think the overwhelming number of businesses that relocated did try to relocate within the East Village, because there's sort of a sentiment among the small business community that this is where they want to be and this is where their base of support is.
Alistair, you have another question?
Thanks. Sorry, it's not a question, it's a pitch. Laura and Andrea, I have an art gallery for rent. If you know anyone, please put them in touch with me. It's a really inexpensive rent. I just want to put an art gallery in there, specifically an art gallery. So do reach out to me, since we're talking about rents and art galleries.
We probably shouldn't be discussing this on the meeting.
I'm trying to do the best I can.
What's the asking rent?
You cannot represent another entity.
All right, any other final questions or comments? We appreciate the discussion, and I also reiterate everything else everyone said. This was really interesting, and I appreciate all the hard work that was put into it. And also echoing July, I hope we can see it online sometime.
Just one more note, if anyone has further questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're, like we mentioned, in the middle of the analysis, and we're very happy to you know, run numbers and do analysis on some stuff that may come to you in the middle of the night and not let you go back to sleep because it's so interesting. So just let us know.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to close the discussion on this informational presentation and go to a roll call vote, or roll call vote. I'm forgetting what this is called, but I'm gonna just take a roll attendance to to end the meeting. So Andrea Gordillo, present. Megan Joy, absent. Alistair Economakis.
Yes.
Herman Hewitt. David Louis. I thought I saw David jump on, but I don't think that's him. Okay. Richard Ropia.
Yes.
Rodney Washington. And Andrew Comey. Okay, thank you all once again, and we'll see you all soon, I hope. Have a good night, everyone.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Have a good night.
Good night.